everyone. Welcome, Paul Sng. Thank you for an amazing film.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to have you and to show Tish within this space particularly. It means a lot to our community and to us, so thank you.
Well, thanks for coming. It's the first Q&A I've been able to walk to, because the rest of them have been all over the UK, and it was nice because it was a 20-minute walk, so thanks for inviting us.
No, it's a pleasure. I was going to ask actually about the community screenings, because you've been touring about, but this is a local screening. How do you feel like that sits with the film? And
I mean, I think it's very appropriate because, you know, Tish worked in communities. That was, you know, part of her kind of bread and butter as an artist, was to be invested in somewhere where she would spend time with people. And I think this might even be the first community screening. It's certainly the first one I've done. And I think, you know, when you put out a film, it's nice to get them into cinemas and that sort of thing, but I think you also have to try and reach different audiences, because a lot of people, you know, won't go to the cinema for whatever reason. And I think because of, you know, who Tish was as a working class photographer, as a single mum, as a woman, I don't imagine that Tish, you know, and the community that she photographed were the type of people that would always go to art house cinemas, which is predominantly where we've screened. So I think it's really important to, you know, when you make a film, put it out there for people to, you know, come and see in all sorts of different places. Yeah,
it feels like you've captured the narrative of Tish really, really well. And I know that you've got a lived experience of being working class, Ella's got a lived experience of it, and from my understanding, quite a lot of the team that you work with have the lived experience of that. Do you feel like that's really important and that's contributed to really having an understanding of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think when Ella and I first met, you know, we talked about the type of film that we wanted to make, and, you know, we both immediately agreed that it had to be political, that it had to be a working class story. And then Jen came on board, and, you know, Jen is a working class woman from the Northeast. Holly Galloway, who was our cinematographer, is a working class woman from the Northeast. And most of the team, you know, were female, actually. I think there was me, John, our exec producer, David Lee, who was the camera on the memory space scenes, and there might have been a lighting guy. But I think, you know, if you're a director, if you're a male director and you're making a story about a woman, it's probably a good idea to surround yourself with a predominantly female team, because then you're not going to have that male gaze on something. And it was important for us as, you know, people who are working class to, you know, be able to tell a story about our experiences, because, you know, I didn't grow up in Newcastle, I grew up in southeast London, but when I first saw the photographs, there were things in them that I recognised from my childhood. And so I think it is important, as Mick Critchlow says in the film, you know, to photograph the tribe, you know, you've got to be from the tribe, you've got to dance the same dance. And I think that is important ethically. I mean, there's nothing that stops a photographer who isn't working class from taking pictures of working class people, but I think, you know, they won't have the same empathy and they'll take very different pictures. I think a good example is probably most of Tish's stuff, but particularly, you know, the picture of Glenn jumping onto the mattresses. You know, that's Tish's brother, and probably only Tish Murtha could have got that photograph. And then Karen on the chair, which is another one of my favourites. You know, Tish gives her, I think, an agency, you know, as a fellow working class woman that maybe a middle class male photographer maybe wouldn't have been able to. So it is really important, I think.
Yeah, within the archives that we have with Craigmillar, they also, I think, really resonate with the photographs. It's really interesting to see, I think, the difference within landscapes that have changed within the spaces and within, I think a lot of archives hold these kind of communities like Tish was motivated to do, to keep it a space in which it was documented, because so much of it is lost. When you worked through the archive, how was that kind of building a narrative of somebody, like through imagery, through oral histories, through voices of others, to be quite true to Tish?
Yeah, really important. I mean, Ella, after her mum died, you know, was grieving and still is grieving, because I don't think grief ever completely goes away. But Ella had already done a really good job in publishing 3 books and having, you know, the Photographers Gallery exhibition. So, you know, a lot of stuff had been, you know, digitized, and there was this body of work to then look at and work out, how to place it. And so Ella was really fundamental in where those images went, because we would sit in the edit and, Lindsay and I and Andrew and I would place images on a timeline, and Ella would always be able to say, no, put that one there, or no, this one here. And sometimes would bring something out, and she'd say, I found this, I don't know if you're interested. And it would be, an unseen Tish Murtha, portrait of someone. It's like, that she had that stuff that she's just, she's got loads more as well. I mean, we did set a couple of rules. One was that we would only use images that Tish had selected on the contact sheet, because obviously Tish knew what she was doing. To use something predominantly as a standalone frame, we weren't too comfortable with. And the other was that, very early on I said, we're not going to mess around with the photos, we're not going to zoom in, we're not going to make them 3D or anything like that, because it didn't feel appropriate without Tish being here to approve that. But after that, it was a case of, sitting down with Ella and Jen and working out who we were going to go and meet. And we knew that, the people that we were going to meet in the film had to have met Tish, whether it was, her siblings, whether it was her teachers, her contemporaries, her friends, or Gordon, who only met her once. They had to have met her. We weren't really interested in having, Martin Parr sitting there saying how much he loved Tish. It's not of any interest to our story. So from there, Ella, had all these postcards and letters, and the stuff we left out was quite tough to know what served the story and what was maybe interesting but not essential. That was probably the hardest bit. The collage at the beginning of the film, where you're seeing Tish in a dark room and all these voices coming in, and almost like a kind of sound collage. A lot of that stuff is from postcards, and I think we snuck in a line which is "God sink Thatcher and all who sail in her," and we didn't put it on the audio description because I wanted to get it past the BBC. I don't know if it finally will, but I hope it does.
It feels like, I think a lot of the barriers that Tish faced, I think it's that kind of, when you have the lived experience, it's such a responsibility to have to represent it. And like you say, documentary photography is so rarely really documented ethically, historically. It's very often folk going in, finding difference, leaving, and then creating this narrative that's not representative. And Tish, I feel, it feels like she has that weight of responsibility, and that's the driving force. But then when she goes into mainstream or organisations, etc., there is not that lived experience because of barriers that are placed up. And it feels like that is an exhaustion that she has to fight against, which I feel is still sadly quite resonating. Are there things that you feel things need to change, like what barriers you have kind of contributed to maybe breaking down, like having people that have lived experience within your team and any kind of, and bringing it into community spaces, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do as a filmmaker is, for the things that I work on, to have a commitment to 50% of the people that I work with coming from underrepresented backgrounds. So, across social class, across race, disability, LGBTQ+I, it's quite hard to do that. It's quite hard in Scotland compared to if somewhere down south. But I think it is important, partly because it's the right thing to do, to provide opportunities. Because I didn't become a filmmaker until I was in my late 30s, and there's many reasons for that. One was financial, I guess, but I think a big part of it was I never saw anybody really that looked like me or sounded like me that was a film director, and so I kind of gave up before I'd even given myself a chance to fail. So I think if you come from a background that isn't privileged, white and male, and you don't see yourself, how can you imagine yourself doing that thing? It's important. I mean, you look at politicians, and it's probably the least inclusive place in the UK, the House of Parliament, and I think it puts people off because they just think, I'm never going to get there. And it's similar in the arts and in filmmaking, that mostly it's very male dominated, it's very middle class, upper class, and so for us, when we make things, it's important to, I think, provide those opportunities. And it's not just being a good Samaritan. I think by virtue of working with people from diverse backgrounds and being more inclusive, I think you get better sort of storytelling. You get people that have got, ideas that maybe have not been, put at the forefront of narrative storytelling. So you probably do it for a bit of a selfish reason as well, to just get that benefit of more wide experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask Paul?
Can I take my hat off and say that was absolutely fantastic?
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic. I am so emotionally charged, and it's so heart-rending to me. I've been a practicing artist in this area for 40 years, and that expresses exactly what we have tried to achieve here in Craigmillar. Wonderful. But reflecting back to what they were saying about in the 1960s, when you had sort of like famous actors and actresses who came from working class backgrounds. For example, Glenda Jackson, Peter Finch, Taylor, you can go on and on and on. And they were up against that same thing about sort of like the establishment not recognising them as working class actors and actresses till they broke through. And I commend you for that piece of work, and I've really all power to your elbow for it. It also follows on recently that in Craigmillar we've seen the film The Royal Oak. Again, wonderful piece of sort of like of the social documentary history made into a feature film length. Wonderfully done, emotionally charged, giving people a reflection on how we are here today in the society. And I also sort of like just reflecting myself again personally on, the life of that wonderful lady. And I had no idea I was coming into this today. No idea. So wonderful. But as you were saying about Sandra George, like Sandra George and Tish are on the same platform, the same ilk, That passion, that sort of like the photography came from there. They were there in the community to record it and to do it. And to find out that this wonderful lady, Tish, and their daughter have now managed to sort of achieve, the sort of like the recognition that our life fully deserves. I'm gobsmacked. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you.
I was going to ask specifically for dates, because we saw 1977 Jubilee and 1918, but the original stuff about the most dangerous square kilometre in England and the earlier bits and the bits that didn't have dates specifically attached to that. Do you know much about the specific dates about that?
Yeah, I mean, Tish and Eileen's childhood, when the period they were talking about would have been at that point, sort of late 60s, early 70s. I mean, I don't know if it's in the film. It was in the film at one point, but Eileen talks about how Elsick had been, they decided it was, in inverted commas, the worst square mile in the whole of the UK. And I think Eileen mentioned it was even worse than the Gorbals. And, around about that time as well, from people I've, interviewed for another film, around that time, that was considered an area of deprivation, etc. But I think one of the things that the areas have in common, though, is they had a sense of community. It was never just complete despair. There was joy there. And I think, people like Tish and from, I haven't really seen Sandra's work yet, but looking forward to seeing it. Those two things are important. Like comedy and tragedy go together, and you do find joy sometimes amongst despair. Sometimes all we've got is each other, to cling to. So it would have been late 60s, early 70s, probably around just after the time, they'd been taken into care and then been returned back to their mum and dad.
I just wanted to ask, how long did it take you, how many years of research did it take you before you managed to make this, and how many people did you speak to? Or are there any that maybe didn't show in the documentary that you spoke to as well? So
I think really in terms of actual making it, probably 3 years, but from first seeing Tish's work, for me, that was 2016, when David Cameron was Prime Minister. And how many have we had since then? 5, all rotten to the core. And then I probably met Ella online around about 2017, and in about 2019, we were messaging one another, and I think Ella had written a nice quote for a photography book I edited, and then 2020, we were messaging about something else, and I just sort of said to her, would you ever consider a film about your mum? And Ella's Ella's very stubborn and very honest and very blunt, and she said, yeah, I'm not interested. And I just, okay, well, if you ever change your mind, let's have a phone call. And then we had this phone call. We chatted for like 2 hours. It was during the lockdown, I think it was the first lockdown. And then when that lifted, I think it was June, we met and we got on very well. And so from that moment and then bringing Jen in, it was probably a 3-year process. And in terms of who wasn't in the film, everyone that we met ended up in the film except the 2 women that Tish donated organs to, but they are in it at the end, just in, you know, you see them and we hear a little bit about their story. We just couldn't find a way to put that in elsewhere. But we, you know, I wanted to get them in somewhere, even if it was just seeing them and hearing a bit about their story. But yeah, it was, it would have taken less than 3 years, but it's really hard to get funding for these sort of things. I mean, now because it's done well, everyone who's vaguely connected to it always believed in it, but you know, it was rejected for funding a couple of times before it finally got funding, and so we did a Kickstart which got us going, you know, so without that we probably wouldn't have got so far into it, and it may never have happened. So it's a slog to make these things, but you know, we were never going to not make it. You know, once I met Ella and we decided with Jen what we were going to do, we had to see it through.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So Tish received quite a lot of, like when she was trying to get things done, a lot of obstacles in the way of, like, from different, like, government agencies. I was just wondering if you, when you were making the film, if you ever had any obstacles like that.
Not from the government as such. I guess from arts funding that is ultimately comes from, you know, in our case, a lot of it is national lottery funding, and then, you know, a lot of the work that I've sort of doing at the moment and have done is funded by Screen Scotland. They've always been really great, and you know, that's government funding. I suppose the main obstacles, you know, really come down to that, you know, when you work with people, you know, you have to have like execs on things, exec producers, and you know, you have a vision for the film that's, you know, shared usually by the team, which would have been, you know, me, Ella, Jen, and our 2 editors. And I suppose the obstacles come when one of your exec producers wants you to do something different, and you kind of just have to hold firm and just say, yeah, we tried that and it didn't work. And so I think you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but they can be obstacles that, you know, get in your way a lot of the time. You just have to navigate them.
Yeah, very powerful film. Perhaps partly in my case because I'm the same generation as Tish. And I was interested in the use of opera, actually, because it seems to imply a kind of breakdown between different classes.
I mean, when I first saw Tish's photographs, and for some reason in my head I thought, I wonder what music Tish listened to, and in my head I imagined that she was into the Smiths and Echo and the Bunnymen and post-punk music, because it was black and white and it sort of looked like that period. And then I met Ella, and Ella was like, oh, she didn't like any of that stuff. She was into jazz, you know, Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis, and classical music and opera. And it just seemed, oh, right, okay. And she also really loved folk music. And when we were thinking about the music to go in the film, you're obviously, a lot of what you can put in is determined by the budget. And at one point, the opera was in there, but it was in the earlier part of the film because it appears 3 times. But the original earlier version of the film, it appeared twice, and the closing credits music was from a guy who's just gone out of my head, who's a folk singer called Jake Thackeray, that's it. And there was this great song called La-Di-Da, and it was perfect. It was going to have the end credits, but then Jen didn't like it. And you know, we're a team, we're collaborators, and so Jen was really like, I really don't like it. And so I was like, okay, we'll find something else. And I think it might have been Ella who said, let's just put the opera in at the end when we're in the Tate and let it carry on. And it was beautiful, it just worked. And on the 3rd time it appears, you see the lyrics and how the lyrics are so appropriate. I lived for art. And I think in my head, I mean, we didn't listen, like my mum never played opera at home. My mum used to listen to like the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. So I didn't grow up with opera and always thought it was for posh people when I was a kid. And now I know better that it's for everyone. I mean, particularly in Europe, in Italy, you know, everyone would go rather than it just being the preserve of, you know, privileged people.
Thank you so much. It's really brilliant. Second time I've seen it in the last week. But I was just wondering if you could talk about your forthcoming film and maybe also how you choose your subjects.
Which one?
The Light Pours Out of Me.
Oh, the John McGeoch one. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you choose your subjects. Sometimes, not that they choose you, but you get approached for things. And the one about John McGeoch was a producer and director called Nicola Black, who's based in Glasgow. And she had read the book, Rory Burke's brilliant book about John, The Light Pours Out of Me. And I'd heard John's name over the years, and obviously I know the music, I know Magazine, I know Susie and the Banshees, I know Public Image, but I hadn't really thought of him as this figure separate from hearing the odd guitar part. And so Nicola asked me if I wanted to co-direct it, and I read Rory's book and just thought, it's another story that's not completely untold, because obviously Rory's written a book, but I think I'm interested in people who maybe haven't received their due, or who challenge the accepted order of things. And so it appealed to me on that basis, beyond the brilliance of the music. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't be interested in making a film about David Beckham or I don't know Taylor Swift, just because one, you wouldn't have much control. It wouldn't be a collaboration. You'd have their manager telling you what you could and couldn't do. So I'm interested in stories that aren't that widely known and working out how to sort of try and bring them to a wider audience. But I don't think that will be the next one to come out. The next one that will hopefully come out is a film about a little-known Scottish writer called Irvine Welsh that will hopefully be out next year. So I do break the rule occasionally. But he does shake things up and challenge things, so he does kind of fit in.
I just wanted to ask about, I think from watching the film, I'm quite angry for Tish that she had to, that she wasn't recognised. I wonder if you've had to navigate with the film and with distribution, with working with spaces that actually would have been totally exclusionary to Tish in the past. But maybe now that you've made the film, it's been successful, people are a lot more keen to show the work or show support of Tish, but they maybe wouldn't have at the time. And because she's not here, maybe you're having to navigate that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that's always Ella's obligation and Ella's choice as the custodian of Tish Murtha's archive and legacy. I mean, I suppose it's a bit of sweetness to, in her lifetime, being ignored and not championed, to now people kind of falling over themselves to celebrate her. And she got there in the end. It's obviously the tragedy is that she isn't here to see it. I mean, I say she isn't here. I don't know what I believe about what happens to us when our bodies and our brains, close down. Maybe she is here, who knows? I mean, while we were making the film, Ella and I used to have this little thing that if a white feather appeared, it meant that it was like a good omen from Tish. And I don't disbelieve that sort of stuff. I know, it's I'm agnostic when it comes to anything. I kind of have that belief that we don't know. So maybe she is here to look down and finally, take something from being celebrated. But yeah, it is a bit bittersweet for Ella as well, for her mum not being around. And Ella often says in these Q&As that that's what sometimes is really sad for her, that she just wishes that her mum was here to see how loved she is and how she's connecting with people. Because I think of all the films that I've worked on, taking this one out and talking about it and seeing how much Tish and Ella have connected with people is very special. I think this is the fun bit really, because when you're shooting the film, it's mostly fun. I find the edit's quite challenging, because it's challenge after challenge, and it's a lot of questions, a lot of struggles. But I mean, it should be challenging work. But then this bit is the fun bit, because I think you find out what people think of it, which is good, assuming they like it. But you also find out other things about why you made it, and I think that's really important as a filmmaker. You think you've done it for one reason, which you have, but then you realise, oh, it's also about this, and people sometimes ask questions that make you realise that kind of thing. So it's great seeing all this love for Tish. It's brilliant, and I don't know where it'll end up. I hope the film will go to other countries, and people in, you know, places that Tish never got to go to will discover her work, because she never left the UK. She didn't have a passport. So if we can take Tish, you know, I think we're going to some countries and festivals next year. It'll be a good thing, I think.
I was just going to ask, what are the things that you've discovered that it was about since?
Yeah, what did I discover? I would say it's an obvious one, but I mean, I'm from a single parent family as well, and Ella and I, when we first met up and were chatting, both discovered that I knew that my mum had made sacrifices for me, and quickly learned that Tish had made great sacrifices for Ella. And I think one of the things I realised with this film and with the film I directed before this, which is about a singer called Polystyrene, again made with a daughter, I kind of think maybe I'm making these films in some way about my relationship with my mum, because my mum, you know, wasn't a punk singer or a great photographer, but she was a brilliant mum. She still is a brilliant mum. And for me, in making these films, and, you know, although they're not about my mum, I think, you know, what I bring to them is, I suppose, you know, my love and my respect for her, and all the sacrifices she made as a single parent, you know, for me to do things in the world that she didn't have the opportunity to. And weirdly, I've recently just started to think about making a film where I would be the subject of the film. And so we did some test filming with my mum the other day, and she was brilliant. She was not, I thought she'd be, my mum was always interrupting when we were talking, like butting in, but she was perfect. She just sort of sat there and nodded, and she was a natural. I mean, she was better than me. I kept looking at the lens, and I'm really bad on camera. So I think making those two films, particularly this one, gave me the impetus to try and make a film about my childhood and what happened to me, and my mum obviously figures in that quite a lot.
Well, once again, thank you, and it's a wonderful piece of work. It really reflects on what the other people have been saying in the Q&A, and how to me this is an important piece of work, and how far out that can be got out to the wider distribution, a wider public, you know, an international audience. I would welcome here if there's any attempts to make that happen. You know, realistically, I know it's always hard when you're up against it. To express what the lady at the back was saying about, felt angry about it. Damn right, feel angry, because, you know, it is a waste of our generation that we had to go through all that, but to see these types of productions to explain what we went through is very, very important in social and economic terms. And lastly is Irvin Welsh. Fantastic, man. I'm looking forward to see Plane Spotting again.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Paul. A delight. Take care, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.